is someone who may be as dangerous as Saddam Hussein, namely Syria. Syria is busily engaged in being a bridge between Iran and Egypt to build a Muslim coalition. One wonders which is the greater evil. But whether it turns out to be evil depends on what we do. We have to find out ways of reaching out to these people, to this place. I was reading the other story of how that oil slick is threatening one of the last great dugong populations of the world in the Persian Gulf. That it's doubtful that any of them will survive, and there are about 1,500 surviving in the Persian Gulf. And apparently the Persian Gulf is not at all what most of us think, a sterile lake in a desert, exactly the opposite. The Persian Gulf is a tremendously fertile fishery and a fountain of life. And it is all in terrible, dire danger of extinction by this oil slick. But there are already people up there trying to clean it up. We need a massive migration of volunteers to go over there and help. Not just cleaning up the Persian Gulf, but embracing the Iraqis and bringing them back as a nation. You know? Because they are our brothers. And more important than any of this, and notice this, as we've said before and must say again, all of this brings up the essential question of each of us and our relationship to God. Because the only brotherhood and sisterhood which is going to survive from this situation is one that is based on a realization that we have this quest in common with every creature, and that the quest is very much alike. I said to someone the other day, well, reincarnation, even through a change of species, we all still resemble one another more than we are different. Try that one for size. What would happen if we should put that up instead of down? You know, what's up for all of us is how we are different. It's called pride. I have a better shaped nose than you do. I'm taller or shorter. I'm thinner or younger or older. And therefore, I'm different from you. And that's what comes up right away. And that's too bad. What should come up is, I am like you. We have the same feelings and the same needs. We look alike. I was looking at a dove the other day and saying, that dove and I look very much alike. And we all look alike. Oh, I'm female, I'm male. Well, that doesn't make very much difference either, as the French say. Men and women, there's very little difference. But vive la différence. But there's very little difference, though. We make much of it, but it's small. And so it is with our religions. We make much of the differences between Christianity and Islam, between Judaism and Islam, between Christianity and Judaism, between all of them and Buddhism, etc. But only a slight examination will tell you it's nonsense. They're more alike than they're different. And if we should concentrate on that common ground, we have a basis for peace. and realize that that isn't wishful thinking, you see. Oh, well, the fact that we are different is obvious. The fact that we are alike is wishful thinking. No. It's just the opposite. The fact that we are alike is obvious. And the fact that we are different is an illusion. This is the result to which Jesus of Nazareth calls those who hear his voice. If today you would hear the voice, harden not your hearts, as did your fathers in the deserts of bitterness. There's the prayer for these days. It's a prayer which, in the old Catholic Church, the priest had to recite every single day. In Latin, of course, so that no one knew what it meant. If today, here's hearing the voice of God again, Ishmael, God hears, but this time he comes back. You hear. If God hears you, then you hear God. That's kind of the testament, isn't it? That's the contract. I will be your God and you will be my people. I hear you, okay, do me the favor of hearing in return. And the word of God comes. If today you should hear the voice, this voice is Hagar's voice, isn't it? The voice in the wilderness. If today you should hear the voice, do not harden your hearts. Do not be an Israel, one who fights against it. We all do, of course. Do not harden your hearts, as did your fathers in the desert of bitterness. And isn't that the story? Isn't that the sadness? Looking back at the wonder of our ancestors, we also see that our ancestors were forever fighting over wells in the desert. One war after another, will it never stop? If today you should hear the voice, do not harden your hearts, as did your fathers in the desert of bitterness. Because the voice calls us to our common destiny. And then there must be, most of all, within each of us, a realization that peace always starts with you. And that in order to have peace, there must be peace in the heart of the quester. It does no good to go out and shout, peace, 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 and bang people over the head with it. There has to be peace in here. And some demonstrators do have it. And you can tell the difference. And that peace begins with surrender. You notice what God tells Hagar? First time she runs away. And this, by the way, is the basis of Islamic morality. Hagar, go back to your mistress and submit to her. And I will be with you. Submissiveness, basic virtue of Islam. It can certainly be overdone, by the way. But nevertheless, when it comes to the voice of God, that's the basic virtue. And of course, that's what the imams say. Submissiveness to what? To the voice of God. And watch out for the perverters. But nonetheless, it is the voice of God to which we must submit. And of course, it is in submission to the voice of God, heard through the long valley of the oak trees of Moreh, heard through the long valley with the light at the end. Let it open and be at peace with that reality that you find there. Because without that peace, there is no other peace that lasts. If you are at war at that point, you will be at war at every other point. If you make peace with your God, not with someone else's, you will be at peace with your neighbor. Is that the meaning of the golden rule? Of course. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart and soul and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. But morally speaking, unless you are at peace with God, beware. You will certainly be at war with everyone. Hobbes, that great cynic, was right in that case. All I see around me is the war of all against all, he says. And if there is no peace, 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 and there is no peace, we must all become peacemakers. And we must learn what virtue is. Virtue is strength. And strength is the ability to cling to the inner peace in a world gone mad with war. That's virtue. So hang on, as Kipling says, when there's nothing in you, except the will that says, hold on. No. And so to trust yourself when all men doubt you, and make allowance for their doubting too. You know. Somehow or another, we, in getting in touch with our sadness, and please do that. We are given a tremendous opportunity to get in touch with our sadness. Never has there been such an outbreak of sadness in America, I don't think. Maybe not even in the Civil War. Let's get in touch with it. It's like the rain. Getting in touch with our sadness and finding the peace behind it will make us able to reach out immediately, especially to the people of Iraq. Let's do it now. Make peace. Because the outbreak of war was threatening, the outbreak of peace is going to be more threatening still if we are not ready for it. It may come with devastating swiftness, just the way the war did. And we have thrown the challenge down to the world. Now we must make peace. As the Arabian said, when Saddam Hussein, as I told you last time, said, I'm mounting a holy war, and the Americans were all worried and went to the Saudis, and the Saudis said, oh, don't worry about that. In order to have a holy war, you have to be holy. Well, holy peace, holy peace is much more important than holy war. And if it takes a holy person to start a holy war, it takes a much holier one to start a holy peace. And to have a holy peace, you have to be holy. Let's have an ambition for that, shall we? Let us strive for holiness. What is that? Oh yeah, that's easy to say. Those are words. Well, spell it with a W. You know, W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy. It's getting it all together. Get rid of the split in your personality, in which half of you is secular and the other half religious. The church hasn't helped us much with that one. But it's time for us to make peace with ourselves, this inner place, and come together and be whole so that we can be an architect of the peace of the world. As the saying goes, you know, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And never was that truer than today. I have a very strong sense of the importance of making that peace. One person who really gets inside and makes that peace with themselves, the catalytic effect of that in the world is absolutely staggering. It can reach all around the world and make something happen in Pakistan. Believe it. Holiness is more powerful as a motive than any amount of war. It's all about consent, isn't it? Both war and peace. And it's Aesop's old story of the sun and the wind, isn't it? You know, when the sun and the wind argued which one was stronger, and they both tried, and the wind blew and blew and blew, and the man just held the coat tighter, and the sun came out and beamed, and he took it off on his own. It's the story of war and peace. You get the consent, and everything is easy. We must begin with ourselves and fast, like yesterday, or this afternoon, or now, to make peace with our brothers. And if we were challenged to adopt Eastern Europe, now we are challenged to adopt the Arab world. Let us look around us and see what Arabs are in our midst, and make peace with them after we make peace with ourselves, and reach out and press for the brotherhood. And by the way, this is a very easy thing in certain respects. You know, one of the problems with us Americans is that we regard material prosperity very highly. And that's not so bad, but sometimes it is. It turns out that Arab Americans are better off materially than most Americans are. They are living on the upscale, most of them. They have good clothes and good jobs and bank accounts and are, quote, respectable. In fact, they're so respectable they're almost invisible. Did you know that about Arab Americans? Dare to reach out and make peace with these people. If you have trouble, just take a trip to La Jolla. You know who owns La Jolla? The Iranians. They'll do for a start. It's time for peace. And as you think of peace, go back and read the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And read it over and over again until you can say what was said at the beginning of Moby Dick by Herman Melville so long ago. My name is Ishmael. Reminds me of what Pope John did when he met the Orthodox Patriarch. He said, threw out his arms to embrace him and said, I am your brother Joseph. How do you feel about that? Yes?
I think you made two very points there. I guess it depends on the motivation and our national interest. I say that because if they do split up Iraq, it may destabilize the Muslim world for the next 100 years again and continue war. And at the same time, if we do really look through that window and say, you know, what kind of stability if we stabilize Iraq after this war and let it survive intact as a nation and somehow make it into a federation or almost a Marshall Plan, maybe then we can find peace in that portion of the world. I'm always suspicious of the motivations of those people that have something to gain by economically destabilize that whole section of the world.
Yes. To keep them in slavery. You notice that Hagar is given as a slave girl. There's some very curious connections with this idea of slavery. Slavery is the great problem of America, you know. We haven't gotten over it. The Civil War didn't solve it. The reason why the black people in America are still unable to rise economically is because they're still caught in the mentality of slavery. And notice that the slavery extends not just to the black people, but to all the rest of us too, as Simon Legree got slavery badly from the backside. And that slavery is the issue, isn't it? Looking upon other people as less than ourselves. And notice that the marvelous message of the scripture here, Abraham loved the slave girl as his wife. He didn't treat her as a second-rate citizen. Sarah did, but Abraham didn't. Sarah was jealous. And there's another curious fact here. The Arab nation has been involved with this syndrome of slavery from the beginning. And there have always been slaves in the Arab world. The Arabs are the great slave traders of the world. The Arabs are the one who sold the slaves to the English entrepreneurs who sold them to the South. The ethic of slavery is still alive, not only in America, but in the Arab world. And so not only do we have the brotherhood, but we have the same problem, slavery. Yes?
The Arab Club meets at my center. And
Oh, really?
Yes, and I know there's a large Arab population in Monterey area.
Yes.
And they were so upset about everything that happened that they canceled their regular meeting. I think there was some fear there also, and had a special vigil. And they're really special people too.
Well, see, the neighbors are right next door maybe, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah? That's the nice thing about Monterey. We have an incredible international community on this peninsula, don't we? Everybody's here in large numbers. We just don't look around and see them, but they're here. Yes?
Father, you were saying that Ishmael, the Bible, it says he would be a wild ass of a man, and if you take Sodom backwards, it means mad ass.
How about that? Very good. I didn't notice that. Yeah, all right.
The other thing, there are a couple of books out now, and the books are about the rise of the Iraq and the Ba'ath Party and so forth. But some of their original founders got a lot of their ideas from the Nazis back in 41 and 42. And, of course, they got a lot of subsequent help as well in building up their armaments. But it's very sad that their whole idea of virtually venerating him is very similar to what happened with Hitler.
Yes.
And wherever you go in Iraq, every little store, every little place has to have a picture of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
And then every town has large billboards of him. And one man said maybe what we ought to do is target those billboards and start taking them down.
Very good. Well, look, you won't have to worry about that. When this war is over, they won't even find them when they go into that country. They'll be totally gone. The thing is that, unlike the Germans, I think that probably the Iraqis, that Saddam Hussein is undoubtedly hailed as the hero of the nation by official decree, and probably is the most totally disliked man in the country. I think that the hostility of the Iraqis against Saddam Hussein is almost totally universal. They really hate him, you know. And it's they want rid of him, and they want rid of what he stands for. But you know, it's just the same story as the fellow said from Iran. Unfortunately, that 10% or 5% that supports him has all the weapons. It'll come down fast when it goes. Yes.
A real touching moment for me watching TV was when a Navy, these prisoners were taken into a Navy ship and they were being questioned, and they questioned the Iraqi soldier and they said, "Do you feel you're going to win this war?" And he said, "No." And then they asked him, "Well, did you think you would win this confrontation with us?" He said, "No." He said, well, why do you fight? Why did you fight? And he said, well, if I don't fight, my family will be punished. And I'm thinking of a power structure like this. I mean, in that way, I felt so close to that soldier because, you know, what a horrible tragedy.
Yes.
And, I mean, that was a moment of deep emotion.
Yes. Isn't that something? See? I mean, just love and fear, right? And that fear becomes the total motive of every action. And that's, you see this, you know, totally dominated by two things. One, by fear. And two, by the religious precept of obedience gone awry. Sad is the word. And to have a feeling of compassion for that situation is a blessed event. Yes, indeed it is. Yes?
We were talking about last fall I had a very traumatic but enlightening experience going to the death camp at Auschwitz in Poland. And the most moving thing I saw was a display of clothing of children. And also the gibbet in which the commandant would come of the camp. And one of the things that was said about him that he was a very loving father, and he went home each night to his own family and children, only a few yards away. And I couldn't, when you were talking about Saddam Hussein, I tried to resolve the conflict that you see here. What kind of human being, I mean, here are children being consumed in ovens, and here he's going home at night to his own family and children, being a loving father and love children. Like with his fellow.
Man fights God, right? See? I mean, there we are. You know, there's this astonishing, radical contradiction. And there you see it most graphically, but the trouble with it is it reminds you of something about yourself. You see? We've all got this contradiction about something like that. And it comes out graphically in such a case as Saddam Hussein or the commandant of the camp or Adolf Hitler or something. But unfortunately reminds us of ourselves. We've seen the enemy and he is us. You know. And only when we have the honesty to say, oh, I recognize that. That's the reason we're sad, isn't it? It comes home. Yes.
I would like to challenge your statement that Jews consider being chosen people as being different from the rest of humanity, or as you put it, to help the rest of humanity. As far as I know, being chosen people for the Jews is to take special responsibility before Lord and for humanity, and that's all the chosen people are.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because wasn't speaking of the Jews today. I was speaking of the ones at the time of the conquest of Canaan. Kill them all, you know. The God said, kill the Canaanites, kill them all. To hell with you. You see, that was the attitude that was projected actually in the Old Testament at that time. That's not today. That's not what is considered. That's not it at all. There are still some that think that way, though. And that's the same way I think is true of Christians. The word chosen people comes on in English as clergy. The word kleros means the chosen ones. And basically, in the Catholic Church, you still have that attitude going around that the priests are the only people who are truly worthwhile and the rest of them are sort of a massa damnata. It doesn't affect just, the Jews of ancient Israel. It's something that goes on in the American Indian tribes. American Indian tribes, we Sioux are the only people that matter. Kill the Pawnees and vice versa, you know. And that attitude does exist. But Judaism has graduated long ago from that attitude of the Old Testament given in the book. One wonders if the Christians have graduated that far. You know, we wonder, we see a lot of evidence that Christians are probably more like the feeling that they're the chosen people against the Jews than vice versa, you see. So I'm sorry, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't mean to imply that the Jews of today have that attitude, because they don't.
I think that this attitude, this mentality and perception of the Jews is still very much alive in the world.
Oh, yes.
And that's what really brings up a lot of animosity and misunderstanding,
Mm-hmm.
is that misunderstanding of the idea of being the chosen people. And the only way that people, Jewish people, understand it is special responsibilities for the Lord and humanity. And if you talked about, you mentioned the prisoner of war being treated by American doctor, I wonder if you've heard about Hadassah hospitals and the Hadassah hospitals in Israel that are open to all Palestinians and that we and the Hadassah Israeli hospitals are treating people, notwithstanding the fact who they are or what they are, absolutely free. They're open to them.
Well, yes, and you